Paul Frobley.
Save big money. Rochester Today with Andy Brownell and Tom Ostrom on News Talk 1340 KROC AM and 96.9 FM.
Good morning and welcome back. It's Rochester Today. Andy Brownell with Tom Ostrom. Tom, former President Trump back in Minnesota on Friday for the big kickoff dinner for the state convention. What do they call it? The Lincoln-Reagan dinner? Or it's a big fundraiser for the Republicans. And I thought it was interesting, if not hilarious, the coverage I saw, because at least on the television stations, each one had to make the comment that Governor Walz had pointed out that Trump, after his defeat in 2020, said he wasn't coming back to Minnesota, and that Walz indicated, I wish he wasn't coming back to Minnesota. And I saw the video of Trump when he said this, and this has been a general theme all along. To me, I've seen it way too many times. Trump was obviously joking when he said it. His whole demeanor up on the podium, he was leaning over very casually on the podium, and if I lose, I'm probably never coming back, Minnesota. You're a lost cause, or whatever he said. It was said as a joke, and then it's reported as if he was dead serious about it. He's come back for this, even though he promised he'd never return.
Yeah.
Gosh, people, get a grip.
I'm glad you covered that, and I guess he gave a spellbinding speech, and Representative Emmer was there, and all the Republican leadership. Yeah, he's got a sense of humor. I don't think Walz does.
I think a lot of people don't get his sense of humor, or they choose not to get it.
Yeah. Rochester area job growth leads Minnesota. You had an interesting article about that on the KROC News website about our economic strength and the job growth in Minnesota and the percentages. And geographers, economists have what's called a Rochester Metropolitan Statistical Area, an area that encompasses so much population, and it's listed then in the population statistics as that, the Metropolitan Statistical Area. And you had that mentioned in about wage increases and a really bright picture.
Yeah, you got to qualify that. There's a lot of positives to it, but there are a lot of challenges that are associated with it. And it is largely due to Mayo Clinic's presence and their growth, which is driving the need for these jobs. And every time you add one Mayo job, you can count on probably 2 or 3 additional jobs being created in the service sector of the economy, which are extraordinarily challenging to fill and create all sorts of challenges regarding housing and everything else. I guess what I'm saying is it's not surprising that we're in that position right now, considering what's happening with Mayo Clinic.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that metropolitan area, it covers parts of Wabasha County. It covers, and I don't know exactly how the Census Bureau creates those boundary lines, but they do. That the majority of the people living within those areas are working in Rochester, and that's where it comes from.
It is. What the government does is they create a geographic ring that is broad enough to cover certain population levels. Yep. Yeah. And then that's their geography. And then you had another article on the KROC website. The Rochester School Board considers a $19 million tax increase plan. And Superintendent Kent Pickell recommended seeking voter approval for it. And there's operating levies and previous agreements that have been made. And then I noticed he had a list of programs that would be funded by additional revenues and maybe cut if they didn't get the revenues. And he needs money for industrial technology and technical education. I think that's good. And advanced learning accommodations. And then your article mentions we used to use terms like gifted and talented, but that was, of course, considered an insult to people who weren't. So now they call it advanced learning. Jeez. And recent surveys about operating fees and costs and bringing things up along that line on May 21st.
Yeah, they'll be voting on that actually this evening, the school board, whether to pursue the property tax increase. And I think it's kind of anticlimactic. I'm sure that the superintendent had spoken individually with the members of the school board before he put this package together. So I suspect it's a slam dunk, but it'll be interesting. Once again, voters in November asked to approve a property tax increase. And a lot will be said between now and then. And I think a big difference this time around will be, I don't think it was made clear that without the additional revenues, that some pretty steep cuts would be taking place within the school district. And after it was defeated last fall, the $10 million proposal, it was month to 6 weeks afterwards that the school district came out with some very detailed school closing plans, job cuts, larger class sizes, you name it. And I saw it and heard it, but there were quite a few people who were surprised by that. They didn't understand the gravity of the situation. And now the superintendent, I just spoke with him yesterday on the program, and you can listen to it if you want by going to krocnews.com and listening to the podcast of it, that the cuts will be even deeper. I mean, Mayo Clinic came through with that $10 million donation that allowed them to avoid most of the cuts. But now the cuts will be even steeper if this isn't approved. And he wanted to be careful about that last time because sometimes people have a negative reaction when you say, if this doesn't get approved, these bad things will happen, because they take it as a threat. But what they found out with the polling was that's exactly what people didn't hear last time, and they wish they had heard, because they didn't understand the ramifications of not approving it.
Mm-hmm.
But still, it's you have an uphill battle on your hand, because 80% of the people living in the Rochester School District do not have kids in the school district. So it's always a challenge to get somebody to go along with a tax increase.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
The teachers union expelled a whistleblower, a Rochester school counselor, who I think is very courageous. Her name is Christina Barton. She received a letter from the Rochester Education Association. She's being expelled from the union. This is from the Center of the American Experiment. She voiced concern publicly and was told not to. I don't know who told her not to. School officials or union officials don't bring this up publicly, but she did. She voiced concern publicly over the transgender, gender expansive administrative guidelines. She was warned against making it public. She received a letter from the REA, said she violated their code of ethics on tolerance, so they're expelling her from the union. How about that for tolerance of diversity and different opinions? And then they said she spoke negatively about students then and union members. And then she said this: it seems that in a culture where all are supposed to be welcome and tolerance of diversity and bullying aren't tolerated, I get treated intolerantly and bullied and expelled from the organization because my statement to the school board on March 19 upset people, and I've experienced threats, retaliatory responses that have hurt me as a person. I'm a dedicated counselor. I'm concerned with these issues and the impact on students and how we should handle these things, both for troubled students and yet civility and balance. And so she's been expelled, but for taking on the union and critics and this volatile issue, I think it showed a great deal of courage on her part.
I wondered, what does that really mean to be kicked out of the union? That she doesn't have to pay the dues anymore?
Well, yeah,
she would receive the same pay and benefits.
She will, but she wouldn't have benefits or protection if she got in trouble, like say a free speech issue or something.
So a grievance process or something like that.
Right,
okay.
Right.
Okay.
I think that'll do it for the Minnesota and local news. I do have one more item I could leave for till next time. What do you think of the time?
Well, we have a little bit of time here before we have to take a news break. So we can bring up the state legislature wrapped up their business late Sunday night. And it's interesting to me. I'm hoping to get Bill Werner from the Minnesota News Network on later in the week to talk about this because he got to witness firsthand what went down. The Democrats in control of both the House and the Senate, but yet they were unable to finish their work. Now they're trying to blame the Republicans because the Republicans wanted to continue debate on what was considered a last-minute massive omnibus bill where they took pretty much everything and put it together and hadn't even been to the printer's office yet, and to push that through. And that's the usual partisan bickering that you see. But if it was so important for the Democrats to get this legislation done, why didn't they get it done earlier? There were gaps over the weekend where it was either the House or the Senate wasn't in session for 7 or 8 hours, that some sort of other business was taking place. And I'm not necessarily displeased, but they didn't get a bonding bill done, which may give the governor an excuse to call a special session, which would be extraordinarily ironic, because usually the reasoning for a special session is you have a split government with the Republicans holding one legislative chamber or the governorship, and the legislature, the Democrats holding another one, and you have this massive disagreement that boils over into an inability to pass a major piece of legislation. Well, you don't have that this time. The Democrats have majorities in both chambers. They had some of their own self-created problems that caused controversy at the very end of the session that made it difficult to push some of these things through. But it'll be interesting to see how accepting the public will be if they call a special session, which is usually a great irritant for people that you couldn't get your job done on time. Mm-hmm. And now you got to call me back to St. Paul to finish it. And one of the issues that they didn't get done was this equal rights / abortion rights constitutional amendment, which as a combined proposal is not popular. The polls show Minnesotans don't want those issues connected in a single issue. They want, if you're going to have a constitutional vote, they're going to want it as two separate issues. But the Democrats seem very committed to combining them and pushing them through together. So very interesting last few hours in St. Paul.
That's right. I have 2 items left. I'm going to keep one about Governor Walz being challenged. I'll tease people about it. It's a very interesting issue. But John Hinderaker of Powerline, he was at the ceremonies with Trump, and also that in North Dakota's governor was there, Governor Doug Burgum, who's being touted as maybe Trump's vice presidential candidate. And Hinderaker said Burgum is very impressive. He's a millionaire, made money in software, but he's also an expert on energy. And he said he spoke without notes on details about energy, fuel production, and foreign policy issues. He said the man is articulate, he's brilliant, he's eclectic in intellectual areas, and that he thinks the North Dakota Governor Burgum would be a good VP candidate. And Trump has mentioned that.
Okay.
And that's my Minnesota news. We'll save that one item for next time.
Okay. We'll take our break for news. TJ's ready with an update, and we will return right after that. On Rochester Today with Tom Ostrom, I'm Andy Brownell on News Talk 1340 KROC
FM.
Good morning and welcome back Tuesday with TO. It's Tom Ostrom. I'm Andy Brownell, Rochester today. What do you want to start with on the national front, Tom?
Chicago Alderman Raymond Lopez is just furious at how Chicago's being run, how that mayor has no competence, and how the violence and shootings in Chicago continue. And he said another problem we have is the diseases in Chicago from migrants, measles and tuberculosis, because migrants have been allowed not to have to follow the vaccine rules or inoculation rules or the testing or interviews to see what shots they are. And there's a lot of illness among them, and it's being spread around Chicago, and people are trying to cover it up. But and then the children come, and then they're not well, and they have to be taken care of. But it's a problem for families and communities and public health. And it's not being reported, and he wonders if the problems are elsewhere too. And related to that, Republicans are trying to stop Biden from accepting illegal immigrants from Gaza. The illegal immigrant overload has been up by 5,000% on Biden's watch. The costs to various communities and the costs and the crime and the public school costs and the public health costs, the illegal overload in a border town in Texas is just ruining the economy of certain cities and in Kinney County, Texas, especially. And that's a real problem. And then so Biden is thinking about bringing migrants from Gaza, the people that are fleeing that war and going into the South. And Senate Republicans are moving to stop Biden from resettling Palestinians into American community. The security threats there and the political challenges that would come from that, and they're going after him, and they're using Biden's using the federal government's refugee settlement program to try to bring Gazans here. And the senators write to Biden, your administration reported a plan to accept Gazan refugees. That's a security risk, increased costs, security issues. We are not confident that your administration understands this high risk that adds to our immigration issues. And so Biden is even thinking about that as people try to aid the Gazans who are in the middle of all this. Well, what do you think of that, Gazan refugees?
I don't know what to think of it, to be honest with you. I don't have any idea of the numbers involved, how the people who would be resettled would be selected, what sort of timetable you'd follow. Just not enough information to know what's going on. I think you'd have to have some sort of extraordinary vetting taking place to make sure that Hamas extremists and fighters don't slip through the cracks. And that might be difficult in itself because of the destruction of public records in that part of the world and of the infiltration of Hamas into the Gazan society, and they're integrated. So I don't know. Yeah, I mean, you see surveys that show that upwards 80% of people who live in Gaza sign on to the Hamas philosophies of the hatred of the Jews and the reception of what's happened on the college campuses here in the United States over the past couple months. I would say the public's mood would probably be pretty sour to that idea.
Right. And as you mentioned, those percentages and their indoctrination from being children, of course, that element of philosophy is going to come with them. And
at the same time, my heart goes out to the people suffering. I can't imagine. I mean, we don't often take stock of how lucky we are and where we live and how good we have it, and to be a person who had the bad luck to be born into that part of the world and subjected to what they've been subjected to. I can't help but be sympathetic.
Well, sure, but the problems of the world, as much as liberals blast America and how evil it is, they don't seem to have any trouble with people coming here and want them to. If we're that bad, why do they want them to come here? But we can't take on the whole world, and there's more troubles overseas everywhere than are in the United States. And everyone evidently wants to come here if they can, and there's got to be a limit.
Well, I think the whole idea of immigration right now has become such a hot button issue, especially with the presidential election looming. Biden probably would not be doing himself any favors by pushing this as far as politics are concerned, because the overreaching issue of immigration, especially illegal immigration, has moved up the list of issues that concerns Americans to a degree that I even found surprising. And the polling shows that it's not necessarily a partisan issue. Democrats are more and more voicing objections to this as well.
And they are, because polls are against these things, and Democrats are up for elections, and they see the problem for them. So they're jumping ship at election time on the issue.
And and I'm sure what we'll hear over the next month or two is President Biden acting tough on immigration at some level.
Yeah. There's a category of migrants called KSTs, and that's known or suspected terrorists.
Right.
And they've been apprehended at the northern border in great numbers, usually up in the northeast there, but it's outpacing the history of this, the numbers that have been apprehended and given this label. First they're apprehended, then they're given this label. So what I don't understand is how do they know these people's background, and what are they doing about it? Do they just catch and release and send them on, or are they putting them in prison? They're known to law enforcement agencies as in the terrorist screening data set, a federal database that has, but I don't know how accurate those are and how alarming they are. But immigration authorities are concerned about it. Border Patrol Chief Mark Hogan said these openings are dangerous to America. It's a threat. We don't catch them all, but they never say what they do with them, even if they catch someone that they're suspicious of. And then the number of adult single males from hostile nations in the southern border, that's significant, but they say it is in the northern border too. And FBI Director Chris Wray warned that heightened terrorist dangers are occurring in America since the Hamas attack in October on Israel. And Homeland Secretary Mayorkas won't answer questions. What's his knowledge of how many KSTs have been released into the country? What happens to them? And but even the FBI director is concerned. So maybe he'll stop going after Catholics and pro-choice. Maybe and there's people that are against abortion, and maybe he'll stop going after adults that appear at school board meetings. We'll see.
A little sarcasm there from Mr. Ostrom, but
yeah, it is. But I mean it.
Well, the other aspect of this immigration question is garnering more and more attention is why are droves of Chinese nationals showing up along the southern border, and what's the explanation for this unexpected influx?
Sure.
I mean, there's just a bunch of questions.
thousands of
How are they
military
getting
age
here?
men.
How are they getting out of China to get here?
Yeah, and why is China letting them out? Why are they coming for
I
the?
mean, are these the new wealthy elite that Xi are becoming less in favor with Xi, and he's saying good riddance, get out because you've been tainted by capitalism and your desires, narcissistic desires you read about. If you the younger set who's bought into the social media business in China is interesting. I don't have any answers to it.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
before we go to the break, I think we have to touch on the Trump trial taking place, and it's gotten to the degree that I don't even understand how they could have brought this to trial. How Cohen could have ever been considered a witness in this trial. He had to admit on the stand that he stole money from Trump.
Mm-hmm.
Well, right there, that would more or less destroy his credibility for most people at that point. That, okay, this is a guy who stole money from Trump while he worked for him, and now he's hell-bent on getting him incarcerated for... And then on top of his other missteps, both in the legal front and in his public appearances, I just can't imagine that a group of attorneys sat down in an office and said, oh, yeah, this is great. Let's go to trial with this guy. This is going to work out really well.
Yeah,
I can't see it. All right, there had to be somebody going, are you kidding me? You're going to put this guy on the stand? And this is the guy you're going to make history with by going after a former president in a criminal proceeding? This is what your case hinges on, is this guy?
Yeah.
Oh,
anything to get him on phony charges and made up crimes and then a witness like that. Yeah.
But it's like a bad movie.
But
you must have known it was going to backfire on you.
But you wonder if those left-wing juries are so biased that they don't care. They just want Trump nailed. Or will some of them have the courage to have a hung jury?
Just takes one.
Yeah, right.
There's one of 12 looking at this. They can produce the witnesses that they say corroborate Cohen's story. But if Cohen's story is not credible, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Oh, I've never seen it. It's stranger than truth. It is.
Right.
It's weirdest thing I've ever seen. You
Right.
bring the porn star up to testify, and then you bring this guy up to testify, and these are the prosecution witnesses.
And they're
it's crazy.
They're trying to make a porn star virtuous. Yeah.
All right, we'll take our break. We'll come back. Lots of stuff happening, stuff internationally, so we got to carve out a few minutes for that. Tom Ostrom's here. I'm Andy Brownell. It's Rochester Today, News Talk 1340, KROC AM.
Paul Frobley.
Rochester Today with Andy Brownell and Tom Ostrom on News Talk 1340 KROC AM and 96.9 FM.
All right, we're back with Rochester Today. I'm Andy Brownell with Tom Ostrom, and quite a shocker over the weekend that this helicopter crash in a remote area of Iran took out the president of the country and a number of other top officials. And what's going to happen next?
Yeah, the Iranian president, who has a reputation for brutality and killing thousands of opponents. He's the Iranian president. He was up to take the top job, so there'll be a leadership vacuum now. And then the foreign minister, the equivalent of our Secretary of State, and the other officials were on a helicopter. It's a Bell helicopter made in America, and it's about 50 years old. And Iran's having trouble getting replacement parts because of the sanctions nations have levied against it. Some people say that might have been the cause. Others say Israel might have done it. But then there's some historical geography we got to get straight. Azerbaijan. The officials were going to the country of Azerbaijan, which used to be a Soviet satellite, and then now it's independent. And I checked news stories, and reporters were mixed up about that. Azerbaijan, where the Iranians were consulting with Azerbaijan leaders about a dam that affects both nations and their waterways. But anyway, and then the plane crashed in Azerbaijan. And so people think that it crashed in the country of Azerbaijan, but it crashed in Iran, which has a province called East Azerbaijan.
Oh, okay.
So it crashed in Iran, but a horrible crash and very nasty weather. And some people say Israel was behind it, but it looks like it was, in fact, a malfunctioning helicopter. There were two others that made the trip back safely. But you're right, it's really significant in its impact on Iran. We'll see what happens.
Well, and you're right. And he was a hardliner who always had the back of the Grand Ayatollah and supported his radical and extremist ventures in that part of the world. Odds are that he'll be able to replace him with somebody with similar background. But you know what? All those guys are getting old. You know, the group that took over the embassy in 1980, or no, it was 79.
In the 70s,
it was 1999. They're all getting pretty darn old, and you wonder, you know, when a younger generation finally takes hold there, what changes might be possible, because there are reports of some celebrations taking place in the streets and people shooting off fireworks to celebrate the man's demise.
Yeah.
Well,
And the population of young people is against that regime, but to be so is dangerous. You get killed or imprisoned. So, yeah, you wonder what will happen.
I pray for change over there. It would be wonderful. Yeah. Because a lot of the young people who are the children and grandchildren of these original radicals went overseas for their educations and saw how the West lives, and many of them, I suspect, are secretly jealous that they could not live the way they were living in the West and would like to have a more liberal type of government instead of the theocracy that they're living under.
Yeah, right. And then according to a Ukrainian newspaper and another source, the U.S. is trying to keep this secret. The U.S. is buying Soviet-era aircraft from Kazakhstan. It's buying these aircraft that are being sold on the international markets. Kazakhstan auctioned off over 100 fighter bombers and fighter planes, and they're supposed to be they're supposed to be outmoded, obsolete.
They give them to the Ukrainians, right?
But to be revved up and given to the Ukrainians, because some of them know how to fly those Soviet airplanes, and that would at least give them some air support against the Russian air offensive. But the Biden administration has outmaneuvered Vladimir Putin, they said, by buying about 80 Soviet-era jets, and for a minimal price. And they must be going to go to Iran or to Ukraine, yeah.
Well, that makes sense. You're right, because they do have their pilots, those who are probably not the youngest pilots around, but they do have people who underwent Soviet training, and those were the aircraft they flew.
Right.
Interesting.
And then, while America props up the Ukraine, former Afghan soldiers that were trained by U.S. forces are coming to the aid of Russia. They're joining the Russian army. Many of these Afghan soldiers were sold down the drain by Biden's withdrawal. They were people who expected citizenship in America for supporting U.S. troops. They didn't get it. Many of them are fleeing for their lives, thinking they're going to be killed by the government. And so these Afghan soldiers are training, and Russia says, come fight with us. You'll have security, you'll have pay, you'll have Soviets or Russian citizenship, and they're doing it.
And this is the same. Well, it's not. It's the Soviets who invaded Afghanistan that created the Mujahideen and a whole host of issues that we're dealing with today. We've got to run, Tom. I apologize. We are out of time, so I look forward to talking to you again on Thursday.
You too. Me too.
All right. Tom Ostrom, I'm Andy Brownell, and this has been Rochester Today on News Talk 1340 KROC AM and 96.